What's up guys, Asian here with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the stamina DK. Stamina DK right now is not in a really great place. There was a change made to Stone Giant which makes it a little bit tricky to use. It is still a DPS spec that might be useful due to the changes to Stone Fist, Stone Giant, which makes it a little bit tougher for tanks to use, but it still does pretty low DPS compared to the other classes in the game, and so because of that, not many people actually play Stam DK. Despite that though, Stam DKs are still capable of pulling respectable DPS, and even though Stone Giant is a little bit clunky to use, it still works well, and it is the only source of the stagger debuff, which does increase overall group DPS. So if you have a very good stamina DK DPS, they are more than welcome into most groups if your DK tank is not really capable of maintaining those stagger stacks. So for gear, make sure to check out the gear video. There will be a link up in the upper right hand corner right about now. So if you're interested in knowing what gear I'm running, you can go ahead and check that video out, and then come back here for the skills and the rotation. So I won't be going any other over the gear that I am running here. It's basically all in that gear video. So let's go ahead and get started here, starting off with our skill bars. So there are actually two different skill bars that you could run here. I'm going to be using this setup here for the parse, but I will show you a parse from the other version of the skill bars that I have set up. So we are still running Stone Giant here. Now, due to a couple of changes to how they worked Stone Giant and how it interplays with the Helping Hands passive, it actually is a little bit harder to sustain Stone Giant now in Harrowstorm as it was in Dragonhold. So a little bit of a drop in sustain, just keep that in mind. Then we have Venomous Claws, Noxious Breath, Whirling Blades, Barbed Trap, and Flawless Dawnbreaker. On our back bar, we're running Consuming Trap, Poison Injection, Endless Hail, Flames of Oblivion, Barbed Trap again for the additional weapon damage, and then Standard of Might. Now I am using the Maelstrom Bow, so we're using Endless Hail. If you're running the Master's Bow, you could go with Arrow Barrage instead. It's up to you which bow you decide to run. I would still recommend running Poison Injection even if you're running the Maelstrom Bow. It's up to you whether you want to run that during the whole fight or you only want to run it when the enemy drops below 50% health. I personally use it throughout the entire fight, but it's kind of up to you how you want to deal with that. This slot here, Consuming Trap, is also a flex spot here, so if you don't want to run Consuming Trap, you can run a few other abilities if you would like, depending on what you need. In terms of DK abilities, not too much here is going to be really helpful for you. It's mostly going to be coming from other abilities in other trees. So, for example, under the medium armor line, you have Evasion, and its two morphs, Shuffle and Elude, which gives you Major Evasion, which reduces damage from your damage area of effect attacks. So this is particularly useful for additional survivability, particularly in PvE content. A lot of damage does come from AoE attacks, and Major Evasion just gives you a little bit of additional survivability. You could also run any number of the Fighter's Guild passive. For example, you could run Camouflage Hunter here, or you can replace Camouflage Hunter here on the front bar here if you want some additional Minor Berserk when you deal critical damage from the flank. Otherwise, you could also run something like Ring of Preservation for a small self-heal along with Minor Protection. You can also run something like Silver Shards if you want some additional cleave. Stam DKs do have pretty decent cleave with Noxious Breath, but if you want a little bit different source of cleave, you could also run Silver Shards instead. And then under the Undaunted line, you could run Shadow Silk for the Spider synergy, the Black Widow synergy. Not as strong as it used to be, but still potentially useful, and it's still just free DPS, so you might as well run it, particularly if you have some bow stamina builds in your group. And then under the Alliance War line, under Assault, you have Vigor if you need a self-heal. You have Echoing and Resolving Vigor. Personally, I recommend running Echoing Vigor rather than Resolving Vigor because Echoing Vigor does stack with other Echoing Vigors that are cast, so you have a lot of, if you have 3 or 4 7 DPS all running Echoing Vigor, if those all stack on each other, you get more healing out of that than if everybody ran Resolving Vigor. So I personally recommend running Echoing Vigor rather than Resolving for your self-heal here. Even though Echoing Vigor by itself is less healing done per second. Just the fact that you can stack with other sources of Echoing Vigor. So that pretty much covers it for skills. Now, instead of Stone Giant, if let's say you have a DK tank and they're able to run Stone Giant and maintain that, then you can run Rapid Strike instead in the dual wield line. Keep in mind that Rapid Strike does have a channel time, so if you're running Maarselok like I am here, just bear that in mind. You need to be able to time your bashes appropriately, so it is between the Rapid Strikes after the channel goes through. So if you try to do it in the middle of the channel, yes, you'll get the bash off, but you'll also end up losing some of the hits from Rapid Strikes. So just be mindful of that if you decide to run Rapid Strikes versus Stone Giant. Same thing applies to Stone Giant, where you have a 0.6 second cast time for the first cast of Stone Giant, or to say every fourth cast of Stone Giant. So just bear that in mind if you're running Maarselok. You do need to kind of time your bashes appropriately there. So that pretty much covers skills. Let's go over our rotation really quickly on the 21 million dummy. Let's just reset it so we have full health on the dummy. The rotation here is going to be a little bit dynamic, mainly on the front bar. The back bar pretty much remains somewhat static here, regardless of whether you're using Endless Heal or Arrow Barrage. You can let, in this instance, I'm letting Soul Trap and Poison Injection drop off a little bit here, so that way I can get the most out of my Maelstrom Bow bonus. So the general rotation is pretty straightforward, so it pretty much goes Hail, like that, and then you just use Stone Giant or Rapid Strikes if you're running that instead. And then when Endless Hail runs out, now make sure you have Venomous Claw run completely out before you recast it, because it does deal more damage the longer it is up, so you do want it to run completely out before you re-up it. Then it's up to you whether you want to use Flames of Oblivion on cooldown. If you decide to do it on cooldown, you will basically have to break your front bar rotation in order to run it. But that's the basic rotation. Fairly straightforward. And again, the most important thing is to make sure you let Venomous Claw run completely out before you decide to re-up it. So we're just going to kill the dummy here just so we can get out of combat with it. Now, stand BKs, their sustain is not necessarily the greatest, particularly if you have to bash with Maarselok. So you will need to have your attack here and there, at the very least on a trial dummy. In an actual raid, you will have some additional sources of sustain. You will have things like Symphony of Blades, you might have Hersines, you'll have the Massive Restoration Staff. All of those will help out your sustain a fair amount, so you might not necessarily need to heavy attack in an actual raid environment, but on the trial dummy, we will need to heavy attack, so just be mindful of that. Now, when you get to around 30% health, you're going to want to swap over from Stone Giant over to Whirling Blades. Now, the trouble here is if you're the only person who has the stagger debuff, you will need to try to maintain that as well. So you might not be able to run Whirling Blades because you'll have to maintain Stone Giant instead. With the change to Stone Giant, it's a little bit trickier to maintain stagger. So while you can use both Whirling Blades and maintain the stagger debuff, it's a little bit challenging to do so. So it's kind of up to you if you want to do that or not, if you're the sole person responsible for maintaining the stagger debuff. If you have a DK tank or another stand DK that's able to run Stone Giant, then in that case just completely drop Stone Giant and run Whirling Blades. If you're running Rapid Strikes, just swap over entirely to Whirling Blades around that 30% health threshold. That's when Whirling Blades is going to be a little bit stronger than your spammable. For this particular rotation, we will try to maintain the stagger debuff, but it's probably not going to be perfect. I am not very good at maintaining the stagger debuff in Execute. So let's go ahead and get started with this parse here. Oops. I used the wrong ultimate. That was supposed to be standard and not Dawnbreaker. Too late for that, so we'll just run with it for now. I think I have an earlier parse saved up that I can show you guys. Probably is going to end up ruining our parse here. Judging from a DPS, it's probably gonna, that probably killed our parse, but we'll see. Now I am running Lokkestiiz, so it is important for me to use my synergies on the front bar. I just realized I wasn't bashing. We're actually gonna redo this parse here, because that's actually pretty bad that I wasn't bashing for Maarselok to proc. Reset the dummy really quick. Just let our stamina get back up. Let our potion come back off cooldown. And then redo this time with bashing, and this time using standard at the beginning of our parse. Let's try this again. There we go. So again, make sure we're letting Venomous Claw run completely out before we apply it. You will notice there that because Stone Giant has a cast time, you won't be able to drink your potion while you're casting it. Just be mindful of when you try to drink a potion. Make sure you're not in the middle of the cast of Stone Giant. You won't be able to activate your potions that way. Same thing with synergies as well. They're a little bit wonky. Tricky to run while you're in the middle of a cast time. Just make sure you're not in a cast time when you try to take a synergy. Maarselok cancel out of the standard animation. See here that one I remembered to bash for Maarselok. Sustain does take quite a bit of a hit here. Point where we will have to heavy attack here at least. But at this point here, we will be swapping over to running Whirling Blade here. Heavy attack before we bar swap here. you want to know approximate timing for when you want to use Stone Fist and Whirling Blades, do 3 Whirling Blades between each Stone Fist. Be able to sustain it. Alright, so there we go, that's the Stam Decay. Definitely not my greatest parse with the Stam Decay. I'm not quite as good on the Stam Decay as I am with other stamina classes. Just reset the dummy because my standard's still up. Wait for my standard disappeared actually first. There we go. So we pulled 81.3k, so not quite as high, and again, it could be better. I'm not that great with Stam Decay compared to some other stamina classes. I'm also not that great at remembering to bash on Maarselok every 7 seconds. So this could be higher. I have seen I get probably closer to about 83k on a good parse, maybe 84k. So this is a little bit on the low side. Now with the so this is the Rapid Strikes parse. I got just shy of 80k here. Again, this could be better. You can see here that I was a lot better with the Maarselok bashing, but you still kind of run into the, here it is, you still do run into stamina sustain issues here as a Stam Decay here. You can see it does end up getting very, very low towards the end of the parse here. So Stam Decays, their DPS is not quite as high as other stamina classes. Sustain's a little bit trickier, but they are the only source of the stagger debuff. So if you don't have a DK tank that is comfortable enough maintaining it, a Stam Decay is probably the best option when it comes to maintaining that stagger debuff. But that concludes this build video. Hopefully you guys found this informative. If you guys have any questions at all, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.